Welcome back to Comics Are Awesome, where we bring you everything awesome in comics. You know, a little over a year ago, DC had their New 52 event, which established a new continuity, destroying much of the previously established one. It caused absolutely no controversy. And if you buy that, I have a bridge on Krypton I want to sell you. This week we're taking a look at continuity, what it is, what it lets you change, and why it's got so many people angry.
Take that test.
Okay, first off, let's establish what continuity is, and what it isn't. Continuity is an agreed upon series of events that have taken place. What it isn't is a timeline. What's the difference? Well, a timeline is a linear series of events. World War I ends, Germany hits extreme economic downturn due to sanctions, Hitler rises to power, the Nazis invade Poland, etc., etc. These are a series of events that you can put dates to and follow them flow one into another. Continuity, or at least comic book continuity from Marvel and DC, is like, hey, doctor?
More like a big ball of wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
Yeah, like that. You see, comic book continuity isn't dragged down by dates because comics can continue forever. There are no actors who grow too old for the part, and most of the time there's no single writer who has the sole voice for the characters. In reality, Batman would have been too old to fight crime long before I was born, and because comic book continuity is fluid, he can remain as young as the writers and artists wish him to be. It's more akin to mythology. The Greeks had their myths, which then were adapted by the Romans, who put their own spin on them. That's not that different from the Silver Age of DC, which took the archetypes of the Golden Age heroes and reinvented them for the audiences of the time. And that has trended from then to the present in both minor and major ways to allow these characters to long outlive their creators. So good news! Your favorite character could have decades worth of stories. Bad news? Your favorite character could have decades worth of stories. You see, because some of these characters have histories that going so far back, it can seem very intimidating to new readers. Who wants to read through all these stories to get caught up? Now, personally, I don't buy that. It's an excuse not to want to try something. If anything, comics are amazingly easier to get into now more than ever. There's never been more collected archives of older comics available to you than right now. Omnibuses, Absolute Editions, DC's Showcase Presents, and Marvel's Essential lines all provide various methods to pick up a ton of classic comics at your local comic or bookstore. Plus, you can buy comics directly on your phone or tablet device. If you're a cheap bastard, Wikipedia and online message boards are normally a very good free source to read up on characters or teams that you want to know more about, and is absolutely free. Hell, if you ask me nicely on Twitter or an email, I'll try to answer any questions to the best of my ability. You can jump into most, if not all, comics and still get enjoyment out of them. Just work off the context of the story. If you go into a bank and you see a new teller working the counter, in order to get your deposit processed, you don't exactly need to know her intricate backstory. I've heard people suggest we should just move away from continuity-based stories altogether. If you want to tell an Aquaman story where he's the only superhero on the planet, you can do that and still have him in the Justice League story in another book. And while I'm fine with the idea of non-continuity stories, there are some great ones out there, but I think there's a very real human desire to find out what happens next. We develop favorite characters and like to imagine how they will respond to the next thing in their lives. If every book has no impact on any other book, then no book is truly special. It doesn't make them bad, but I'd be less inclined to try out a story because of certain characters in it because they exist in a vacuum, disconnected from anything past or present. So for me, continuity isn't the hang-up that some make it out to be, and in fact can be a great boon to comics. But that said, I don't feel we should be a slave to it either. Because there's so much continuity, mistakes are bound to crop up, and I think most people are willing to let these continuity errors go. And sometimes the creators want to try something new. For example, after Crisis on Infinite Earth, not the first, but perhaps the most notable universal continuity shakeup, they decided that while most heroes' histories would go on with only slight tweaks, Wonder Woman would debut as an all-new hero. And that era of Wonder Woman, as told by George Perez, is often cited as one of the landmark runs on the book. It can be defended as being the source of the modern Wonder Woman. And when Jason Todd initially appeared as the replacement of Dick Grayson's Robin, DC was so afraid of making the switch they made it so that he heavily resembled Grayson's origin, down to the idea that both were trapeze artists. After Crisis, they made Jason a street orphan who Batman caught stealing the wheels off the Batmobile. That ballsy move influenced the character's direction and made him stand out far more than his initial origin allowed him to be. So to get him away from being like Dick, they made him a bigger dick. Who writes this shit? So if continuity changes aren't a horrible thing, why are so many people upset at DC because of the New 52? DC, and to a much lesser degree Marvel, have retconned stories, altered reality, and undid marriages before, so why is this one stuck in so many's craw? Well, ignoring the fact that it's the internet and everyone's angry about something, I have a theory. It's a math difference. When Crisis on Infinite Earths happened, less changed than people often give it credit. Oh, Superman's parents were now alive, Wonder Woman was a new character, and Hawkman was confusing. But for the most part, most things remained the same, and the things that didn't were just rejiggered to fit just slightly different. It wasn't seamless, but for the most part it added to the mythos. Instead of the Justice Society taking place in an entirely different universe, and basically being occasional guest stars, they were now part of its history, the people who helped inspire the modern-day heroes. This added to the mythos instead of subtracting it. Later, Zero Hour and Infinite Crisis would change continuity to lesser extents, but for the most part it was always largely minor details. Then we came to the New 52. As I see it, the big problem is twofold. First off, this is rushed, sloppy world building they're doing here. Recently, it came to my attention that the first trade collection of Teen Titans removed or altered the narration from how it appeared in the individual issues. Apparently DC has decided that Tim Drake never used the name Robin, but has always been Red Robin, and that there's never been any previous versions of the Teen Titans before the current one. I don't like those decisions for reasons that will tie into my second point, but I could live with them. But to print the story one way and then print it another in less than a year is just messy. Even in the relatively small niche market of comics, most people don't follow comic book news. So when DC editorial goes, "You didn't say no takebacks," it will likely just lead to confusion, especially amongst those who have been reading the individual issues since the relaunch. And I imagine that a large part of doing this reboot was to streamline things down, to make it less confusing to casual fans. If that's the case, then you can't half-ass this stuff, DC. Figure it out beforehand or deal with what's been committed to paper. The other problem was what was changed. Like I said, in Crisis on Infinite Earths, while far from perfect, but it mostly added to the DC universe as a whole. It gave it more history. It added new characters like Blue Beetle and Captain Marvel to the universe. For the few minor things it took away, like multiple Earths, it added that much more. New 52? Kind of the opposite. It took away far more than it added. Yes, Milestone and Wildstorm characters like Static, Grifter, and Stormwatch were added to the DC universe, and I'm all for that. But what did we lose? Stephanie Brown, Cassandra Cain, Wally West, Connor Hawke, the Justice Society, the previous Teen Titans, every single Justice League story ever, Superman's marriage, Flash's marriage, Tim Drake as Robin, Amanda Waller's waistline, hell, even old costumes have been retconned away. And probably more that I'm not even thinking of as well. While this is comics, so they can always break some of these elements out of retirement if they want to, it shows a kind of in-your-face, Poochie-like mentality that DC seems to possess right now. See, for some fans, it's more than just being a fan of a character, more than being a Batman or Spider-Man fan. You become a fan of the continuity. You become invested in their histories and relationships. And when you shake that up, you unsettle their footing. What they feel they know about the character. Now, on a creative level, sometimes readers have to accept that these things will be shaken up. It can help keep things fresh, but since they took away more than they added, well, it's hard to feel as invested in the universe as I was. Now, to be clear, I read several books that are coming out from DC right now. I do not at all want to diminish the great works of talented creators. But that's a credit to their craft, not to the success of New 52. You see, continuity is like a spice. You add too much, well, you overwhelm the reader. But you add too little, kind of leave it feeling a little bit more bland than it could be. You know that big ball of, hey doctor?
Wibbly wobbly, timey wimey.
Quit playing with yourself, Doctor. Anyways, I like that description because comic continuity should be flexible and loose, not a rigid, stiff timeline.
I know it sounds like I'm picking on DC, but Marvel has handled it largely better in my opinion. Marvel has updated their continuity, no doubt, but save one very big exception, it's generally gone over pretty well. To most people, it doesn't matter whether Tony Stark became Iron Man in Vietnam or Afghanistan. It just makes sense to move that to fit into something that doesn't make him old enough to be a Walmart greeter. Just like they simply don't refer to the fact that the Thing and Mr. Fantastic served together in World War II. Despite these tweaks, save for the comic that shall not be named, Marvel has largely allowed these comics to continue from their earliest days into the present without hitting the reset button on continuity. Continuity is flexible enough to allow for these things, and for the most part, the comics are better for it.
There is no single right or wrong way to handle comic book continuity. Everybody does it differently, and they're all good. But for me personally, I like seeing characters that can come together and interact. I like seeing histories that will have ramifications and consequences. For me, that's what makes comics great. But to each their own, and if you don't like it, feel free to leave me a comment and let me know what you think. But remember, comics are awesome, and we're gonna get the word out.
That's just the way it is. Some things will never change. That's just the way it is. Ah, but don't you believe?